we've got an interesting cast of characters from very different backgrounds with very different mandates. So we can hopefully bring this topic to life in a kind of broad and diverse manner. We've got with us Suja Chandy. Like they said, she herself wears two different hats, right? So she is the Global Chief Sustainability Officer for Zafin, which is a large fintech organization, SaaS organization. But she also runs India operations for the organization. And Suja brings a really vast experience across geographies, and we'll be digging into a little with that with her, with Canada as well as India. And the interesting aspects of Suja's background for us is prior to Zafin, she was an MD at Nissan Digital and set up digital transformation as a global hub for them. And I think even more interesting is Invest India and her mandate there. So welcome to the panel, Suja. Lovely having you here. We have Anoop. Anoop and I have known each other a little longer, so it's harder for me to introduce him, I think. But Anoop, he's the country director of India for TCIS, or Tervlinga Center for Innovation in Shelter, which I think of as the innovation arm of Habitat for Humanity internationally, and who do fantastic work that I've had the joy of seeing, at least in the past few years. What's special about Anoop is that he has been able to look at startups across Kerala Startup Mission, has been very, very instrumental in taking the lead on setting up the construction hub that we just saw startups from, but also has the background of Accenture and Grey Matter Capital from another part of the startup world. So hopefully we'll get some of those insights. Thank you, Anoop, for being here. And our final panelist, Vishal Thakur is the Chief Technology Officer at Nasscom Foundation, as somebody had mentioned, and also has been leading up Tech for Good as part of that mandate. And Vishal and I had an interesting conversation just before the panel where he was talking about the fact that he's been a technology leader in the US, came back to India, still runs a startup focused on the US market, but is now kind of made the transition into social impact and using technology for impact in this new role and in other things that he does. So welcome to the panel, and hopefully we can get started. Yeah? So I kind of wanted to start here with a slightly provocative, start. I kind of feel like sustainability is always pushed off a little to these zones that we kind of have to navigate the rest of the conference to get to. And we are kind of having our little huddle about sustainability where, something as important as buildings, which constitute like 80% of where we live, work, and sleep and play, is in its little corner, right? So I kind of want to start, we'll come to you last, Anoop, because this is your world in a sense. But I kind of wanted to start with, what are your views, Vishal, on how mainstream is this whole sustainability conversation that you're beginning to see happening? And even before we start talking about metrics, ROI, sustainability, etc., what is the mainstream progress you're beginning to see?
Yeah, I have seen all three areas of the work. I come from a corporate proper sales background in US. Then I have my own startups also. So I have seen the entrepreneurship side of the world also as to how to sustain your startup and build a long run models into it. And then last 3 years working with social innovators, social startups, social innovation space. I see all three space where sustainability is not primary thinking when you are doing something, right? Be it a project in a corporate or building your own startup, kind of building any CSR program or an innovation for solving some social problem. I think in all three spaces, the original thinking has to start with how it's going to sustain when you stop funding it, or how it can sustain themselves, right? Especially social sector, since I am kind of engaged in last 3 years. um, when you fund any initiative, that's the original time you need to think a agency model where you can make communities responsible for from day one on any funding you do for social startups or accelerator startup. You need to see how communities are owning it. Are we making deliberate model where community shows an interest, community make money out of it, and they own that piece. So that is from that social perspective. When it comes to startups, I think this theory of valuation is basically killing the value you need to produce to the client, right? So whenever you are thinking about a startup, think about the value, not the valuation. And I think that culture of pushing to the valuation is taking you away from the core thinking on the sustainability of your startup, right? And if you keep that thinking in front, then you will build a sustainable business models, right? You know, valuation, funding, and all will happen, right? And it's the same thing with the corporate, right? It's never about a funded project which you execute and then you wash off your hand, right? You need to have a core thinking as to how you would be transitioning it, and that's how you need to have it.
Sounds great. Thanks. Suja, question to you, especially given the two hats that you wear.
Yes, hello everyone. Good to be here. And so the interesting question that you gave, and I'm trying to catch this and not, listen to the panel that's going on next door. But it's a good question, and we are in the sidelines, but we are in the sidelines, as in like we are actually talking about it, right? In a big event like Huddle, which is I think over the years gaining more popularity. The fact that we are talking about it is a good thing. I see all of the 17 SDG goals right in front of us. And from where I sit, right, and as you said, I have a dual responsibility in my organization. So, as the managing director for India, we do CSR, right? So it is a topic that comes in. And CSR, I believe, is a subset of sustainability, the larger conversations. For us, it's Zafin, and we are a banking technology company, organization, SaaS-based. So, from a data center, from an emissions point of view, much less carbon footprint and all of that. It is a board topic for us. So sustainability is important. It is one of the 6 or 7 critical topics that we address. While we are based in Canada, we are also, our biggest investor is Nordic Capital. We are owned by a private equity called Nordic Capital, who also puts sustainability at one of the top agenda points, right? Like the companies that they invest in needs to be green, more or less, So when we look at it, while it is starting to, in my opinion, it is starting to become a strategic imperative. In my organization, globally, we have embedded, or we have started the journey of embedding sustainability and ESG into our global strategy. So that means on our everyday business, from an operational point of view, we think about it. When we are moving into a new facility, we think about is the building sustainable? Is it energy efficient? In fact, that is one of our critical parameters that we look. And in Kerala, the whole thing around social innovation, and which Vishal and I were earlier at a round table, and we were talking about some of the startups that came and pitched. It has always been a big thing, not maybe called as such as social innovation and use of technology, but technology and social are 2 important parameters that have always been here in Kerala. If you look at their industry policy as well, it's very green, right? We look at companies that are more not from an emission point of view or a manufacturing point of view. Not saying we are not a manufacturing state, but we look at it whether it can blend into the ecosystem without causing too much disruption. So if you look around, climate resilience, climate action, whatever said and done, this has to be an important topic, and I'm pretty sure that next year in Huddle, this is going to be in the main arena, because otherwise we are looking at a topic, and the result of all this climate action, or because of the climate effect, the world is losing around 143 billion per year.
Yeah.
That is something that will make everybody sit up and listen, right? So it is, and we are also starting to experience, even in a beautiful state like Kerala, tourist paradise. We are starting to experience extreme climates.
Yeah.
So all of this means that the attention of whether it's corporate, whether it's government, whether it's the common citizen needs to be guided towards it making a mainstream topic.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Suja. It was really heartening both from the side of your company, Zafin, and, their focus on this, but also the state focus, right? Definitely, I think all of us have that God's own country in our head when we think about Kerala. So we hope it stays that way with all this action. Again, same question to you, Anoop. I mean, you are right now, you've already made the transition, right? You are really in the thick, so to speak, of sustainability as well as affordability in the housing space with the kind of innovations that you all target. But as you reflect on your journey here, or when you're having conversations with more mainstream corporates, mainstream funders, the Corporate Connect program you'll have launched today, kind of what are the thoughts coming back to you? What's the feedback coming back to you on how big this is on their agenda, the sustainability agenda? How big is it in their minds?
My view on sustainability is a little broad. Just a couple of weeks back, and all of this conversation on sustainability and climate action is very fashionable. I mean, it's just so nice to talk about. There is so much of money available, but not enough action on the ground, right? Just a couple of weeks back, my LinkedIn feed was full of posts from Baku saying that, look, I am in Baku. Do you want to have coffee? Right? So I think, so it is the in thing, but I don't think, there is enough action that is happening on the ground. So I think, that's one thing. I'll start with a personal example. I am from Kerala. I studied in Trivandrum, College of Engineering Trivandrum many years back. I live in Bangalore, and I've been in Bangalore since 2003, 21 years. And for the last 18, 19 years, I've managed without an AC, right? Without an AC. So, all my summers, I've been able to manage without an AC, and it just got so unbearable, I had to install an AC in my apartment. And I just use it for a month. After that, I switch it off. I don't use it year-round. But, so that's a personal impact on me of climate change. And just, again, just a couple of weeks back, I was reading about snow in Saudi Arabia, right? It snowed in Saudi Arabia for the first time. So would anybody have imagined about climate change? I mean, the impact of climate change to that extent, right? I think, we have seen flooding in Dubai 2 years back. There were heavy rains in Dubai, flooding in Dubai. So I think, so there is, I mean, it is very real. I mean, Donald Trump says, it's a hoax. I don't know how many people will agree, but I think, you can really feel the impact of climate change. Now, if you see the impact on people, it is also not very equitable or proportionate. So the developed countries have benefited, and the developing countries are bearing the brunt, and we have to pay for it now, right? And our development is being impeded because goals are being put on us, saying that, look, you need to comply, you need to reduce your emissions, etc., etc. So I think, and if you see some of the discussions at COP 29, I think it is, and the general consensus is that, look, it was a failure, not much could be achieved. And even though there was a commitment of 300 billion that was made towards developing countries, people say that, that money is not going to come, right? So the impact is not proportionate. And and if we see the way we conduct and operate ourselves, we are in an interconnected world. And the supply chains are very global. The capital flows are very global. So everything, social media, digital media, I mean, the way the news spreads, everything is so global. I mean, urbanization and migration, global migration. I think, so all of these trends have an impact on sustainability. And if you see the population, it is growing. I mean, 7 billion plus now, but the resources are very, very limited, right? So now what do you do? I mean, it's a very difficult problem to solve. So sustainability, I mean, my view is that sustainability is going to be everywhere. I think, we just cannot avoid sustainability. I think it is going to be a part of everything that we do every day. I mean, even for businesses, personally, I think everything that's going to happen. But again, should this be a main conversation? Should this be a side conversation? And I agree with Suja that, look, perhaps next year we will see this on the main stage. But I think, to solve sustainability, we will need to scope it, right? And we will need to scope it. We will need to solve very specific issues. And yeah, I think, so this focus on sustainability, the zone, I'm hopeful, will lead to some very focused thinking. That's my view.
No, fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm going to take off a little, Suja, on what you got started on when you talked about the board level focus and the executive focus that Zafin has on sustainability. And, given our topic about how do you actually measure ROI on this, is this still a CSR 2% type item globally as an organization for you? Do you all measure it? Do you all, are you all looking for actual outcomes from it in some way? If you can actually go pretty, specific on it, it'll be really helpful, I think, for people here.
I believe that sustainability is a journey for every corporation, right? In the larger scheme of things, we work in the banking industry. So we provide technology to help banks modernize and transform. That being said, we work with some of the biggest banks in the world, our mid-sized banks, the largest banks in the world. And all of those banks are now starting to talk sustainability, right? Whether they are investing in green bonds or, supporting green loans and all of that, and their own way, looking at their suppliers to make sure that they are also sustainable. So when we work with them, but even before that, as an organization, we have been around for 20 plus years. We always had, when the founder, before we were taken over, had always had this, that human thing running through, that cost for social, and so even in India, we were not really mandated to do it, that 2% that you talked about in CSR. Yet, every year, we have been religiously making sure that we spend 2% of our profits into some costs. But what has changed over the years is last year is when I took on this role as Global Chief Sustainability Officer. This role was created, and we started to have an ESG and sustainability strategy globally, right? Because obviously it was also on the board. Then we thought about, CSR is good. We give away funds to, different causes, but are we measuring it? How do we measure the impact, which is very important. So when we started to talk about ESG and strategy at the global level, at the strategic level, we started to look at how do we make sure that what we are doing is not just, greenwashing or, just talking about it because it's trending and we want a checkpoint, but rather it is something that is going to benefit the society and our own people. So we said, whatever we do, it has to be measurable. And that impact we should be able to, share. So when we looked at it, we started to, we are a signatory of the UNGC, the Global Compact, right? And as part of that, we have identified 10 out of 17 SDG goals that we align our strategy on. So which means that we look across the ESG components on what are the things that we can support. Like if I look at it here, on the S side, right? Like we talk about E a lot, right? And that is where there is a lot more ambiguity and there is a lot more where technology is coming in. We are starting to use AI for tracking data. We are starting to, we are a cloud-based provider. So our biggest supplier for cloud, or the only supplier, is Microsoft, who has, has also big, great targets for, net zero and all that. We have committed to a net zero target over the next 6 to 7 years. That's an interim or the ambitious goal, but we are striving to meet that. What does that mean? This year we started to track and look at some of the material topics that are relevant for us that has an impact. And we implemented, and again, like I said, it's a journey, right? Like, so we are also discovering a lot of things. How do we, using the GRI framework, we are starting to, follow that to measure. So that means in the environment, we work, our entire data centers belong to Microsoft across the world. But we work with them to understand what sort of emissions are we. What is our own cloud usage? What is the carbon footprint that is coming in? So we are setting a baseline for us, right? We are starting to look at how much of our office, whether it is water, whether it is energy, what is our consumption? Our travel. In fact, we have a big, I was just telling Vishal here in January, we have a big event where the global board is going to come and, We are in Kerala, for that matter, here in Kovalam. And what we are doing is we have people coming from around the world, across 9 locations. And what we are doing is we are actually tracking the entire carbon footprint or the emissions, and we are planning to offset it by working with an NGO to, plant equivalent number of trees. So for us, this is not just about saying, okay, this is another checklist. This year, in the next few weeks, I have to set in terms of what our baseline and what our journey was. And our next year is, as through our 5-year journey, our next year is to better this, right? And it is not simply reporting. It's also, we are starting to look at our product roadmap. How do we embed sustainability there? So these are all from an emissions point of view. But from the social side and the governance side as well is also equally important. So if you look at the social side, we are someone, and I'm very particular about gender equality, right? We encourage women in the workplace. We encourage other diverse groups or minority, representation of other minorities. We have employee resource groups that support their growth and development. So these are things that we actually track. And from a governance point of view, in an industry like banking where it's highly regulated, and we work with banks in Europe, we work with banks in APAC, India, globally North America, and every region is starting to have different systems and frameworks in place. So we are, in one way it's to ensure that our stakeholders, we are making those demands, but it's also our own employees, our own communities, and the communities that we live in able to, positively benefit from us.
No, thank you for that detailed answer. I think it's great to see the amount of thinking that's gone in, even though this is a new role, right? So fabulous to see that. I'm going to take off on that ESG element to come to you, Vishal. I know you guys just talked about the social innovation framework in your previous, kind of roundtable. But can you tell us a little of your approach or thinking on the social innovation framework that you have been thinking about, what you've been kind of also seeding with Nasscom Foundation?
Yeah, so when we look at sustainability and 2030, all SDG, every country has signed up. India has been saying 2047 Viksit Bharat, right? All of that cannot be done alone with corporate, which is a bazaar, right? The Samaj, the society also has to come out and have some development in it. And then Sarkar, government also has to do something on it. But I think there are 2 important pieces which is also needs to be added onto it. One is a technology and a technology people, right? It's a community, right? Because if you have 22 years and if you need to achieve certain goal as in Viksit Bharat, and Viksit Bharat will come with a whole sustainability climate also kind of packaged into it, right? It cannot be achieved silos with a revenue or a $1 trillion economy, right? Then the technology and the technocrats has to be a one layer, and then the another layer has to be a innovation, and that's where basically social innovation comes in. When you start working with all players together, and then start putting them as a part of a core thinking, and that's where it will start working, right? We started seeing that corporate have given attention to the climate and sustainability piece. They need to work with NGOs to kind of go ahead and get certain things. Now, if NGOs thinks in a very traditional way, then probably it is almost impossible to achieve those things. That's where they need to bounce off on technology, innovation, innovators, and different aspects of it. And that's where we were, when I was building this case for social innovation in last 3 years, and we have grown big time. The whole idea is how to merge startup culture into a social sector, and how to build that innovation and technology as a part of whole implementation. And that's what social innovation is.
Great, okay. That's again a great set of point for you, Anoop. I feel like, any conversation I have with TCIS or with Habitat, the amount of policy, on-ground, government, knowledge that you all have of working with communities on the ground at individual state level feeds beautifully into, kind of having the startups who are trying to implement on the ground. What would you, if you had to articulate, here are a few ways in which that whole, we need the startups, we need the sarkar, we need the bazaar, we need all of this to come together. Ways in which y'all have approached it, I think will be really useful to understand.
Yeah, I think, yeah, all of the above. I think, you need innovation startups to come up with great ideas. There is a policy nudge that is needed. There is also adoption, I think, that is needed by the user who's going to ultimately use these products. See, we are a housing organization, and we're going to look at. I'm looking at sustainability through that lens. And housing construction, the built environment is very resource intensive, right? So you need a lot of, like I said yesterday, there's a lot of steel, cement, natural materials, water, all of that goes into the construction of anything. And when you talk about development, I think, development to a great extent is infrastructure development. So I think, you need a lot more resources. But this sector is also highly polluting. When I say highly polluting, not in a bad way, but, because of the GHG emissions involved in the entire process, in the process of construction, transportation, usage, energy use, water use, all of that stuff. So it is very intensive. One third of GHG emissions in the world, 37% actually, is from the construction sector, right? And so we've been, the NGO does many things, but with the Kerala Startup Mission, we have set up the CIH, or the Construction Innovation Hub, and we're working with a number of startups with a focus on construction innovation in the construction space. And it's very interesting because, if we scan the portfolio, at least 50% of the startups also are in the sustainability space. So it is not by design, I think, so some of these problems can only be solved with a sustainability angle, keeping that in mind. Now, so again, I'm going to divide the portfolio into two. There are startups that focus more on mitigation, how do you basically reduce the carbon footprint. We also have startups that focus more on adaptation, because there is again a huge impact of climate change on people, and therefore, through housing, how can you adapt, how can you help them adapt to the effects of climate change. So I think, we see that across the portfolio, and one of the principles, or some of the principles that we set for the Construction Innovation Hub was, how do you build better, how do you build cheaper, how do you build faster, and then we also said, how do you build sustainably, right? But then if you do the first three, you're automatically doing the fourth one, right? So sustainability, I think, is a little difficult. I mean, you can't pull it out and say that, look, these set of startups are only sustainability startups, or these set of startups are innovation startups in the construction space. So it's sort of mixed. Let me give you a couple of examples, on how we measure sustainability across the startups. We do a lot of data gathering, data capture on the impact. So I won't get into ESG, which is more internal way of becoming a responsible business, I think. So when we look at startups, I think it's primarily with a impact outcome focus, right? Either there is a people benefit, I mean, for the low income groups, or there is a environmental benefit, because it's either less harmful or reduces the impact in some way. So we have a startup called Burn in Kenya. We have invested. I mean, we run an accelerator, Shelter Tech, through which we have supported about 120 startups across the world, across five regions. We also have an internal fund through which we make investments. And one of the investments we have made is in Burn, which is an eco-friendly cook stove company in Kenya. And they have three sources of revenue. One is they sell cook stoves. They get grants from various institutions, and they also make a ton of money by selling carbon credits, right? So that's a very evolved startup in terms of how to measure the impact of all of this work. Not only measure, but also be able to communicate and monetize that. I think so one example. Another example, I mean, is very local. We have a company in which we have invested in Bangalore, Eco STP. You may be familiar. And they do sewage water treatment, right? I mean, without power, without chemicals, right? I mean, amazing idea. And if you, I mean, and they measure all the standard things, you know, liters of sewage water treated, power saved, coal saved, etc., right? And just yesterday, or I think, you know, a couple of days back, they hit the 4 billion liter mark. So they've cumulatively treated 4 billion liters of water, right? Now, so these are all very immediate benefits. You know, you can see water treated, you can see power saved, coal saved, etc. But if you look at it, you take a step back and look at the complete impact on the environment, right? Because this is in Bangalore. The lakes in Bangalore are polluted, highly polluted, right? So this, I mean, by the way, I mean, all 4 billion is not in Bangalore, but most of it is in Bangalore. You know, the majority of the work that they do is in Bangalore. So this water is flowing back into the lakes of Bangalore, right? Otherwise, this would have been sewage, untreated sewage that would flow into the lakes of Bangalore. Now, what is the health impact of this work? I mean, they're not capturing that. I mean, they're only capturing water treated, power saved, etc., revenue, you know, all of that stuff. But, you know, there is a larger public good, right, by doing this work. So, you know, all of that. So what I'm saying is, and again, I mean, we have a number of other startups. Aditya spoke a little earlier. You know, they speak about tons of waste processed, tons of plastic processed, reduction in carbon dioxide, etc. But I think, you know, the total value chain approach, we haven't looked at it. I mean, you know, even through our work, you know, we work with startups, look at very specific metrics around quality, around certification, the immediate metrics, you know, that they're working on. But have we looked at, you know, the total costs of the problem and the total benefits? I mean, that life cycle approach, I don't think, you know, we're yet there. I think, you know, that's still work in progress.
No, that's, you know, we do a lot of work with water startups ourselves. And to your point, whether it's water or air, you know, the public health element, none of us model into what we expect as impact there because it's just almost too complex to think about. And there are large enough numbers in direct impact, you know, for us to measure and think about. So thank you for that. I think, you know, for us, this whole how do we, you know, because of GHG emissions, it became easy to have that one number that we kept talking about, but there are so many other elements to sustainability and climate. And it's great to get the two kind of being the, you know, forward positive, you know, a corporate entity versus the investing entity that's focused on the sector. I think it's great to get both points of view. I want to shift tax a little bit because I feel like all of you all have made significant personal journeys of some kind or the other, and want to understand the thread of that with regards to, you know, sustainability impact, how you've thought about life. And Vishal, yours has been, you know, the technology to social impact. If you can tell us a little about that journey. You've been, Suja, straddling two continents. Would like to understand that a little bit. And Anoop's, again, you know, someone who came from technology, large name, Accenture, and is now, I moved into housing and infrastructure myself and have almost, you know, I always ask him, what made us so masochistic, you know, to move into this sector? I would like to understand a little of that journey.
So I started my journey as any graduate student, you know, in our time, and me and Suja were also talking about it. We've been told that you do your masters in computers, go to America, buy a big house, live a American life, and that's how the success looked like. And I did exactly same. I came out of masters, get started going international, then settled down in US, lived there for 20 years, traveled across the globe, got onto the corporate layer very fast, very up. And then I realized this is not what I was looking for. And, you know, it was a shocker for me I thought, it's not giving me a satisfaction. Maybe startup will give me a satisfaction. I set up a startup. It has started working, and then still it's not working out. So finally, I kind of realized that, maybe I never asked myself what I wanted to do, and when I kind of thought, I need a time, I just kind of closed everything and came back to India and just left my job and then started figuring out what I need to do, what will give me a satisfaction. That's where basically I started working with a couple of startups, started helping them out, started working with some of the NGOs, and then foundation reached out to me and said, technology, sales, entrepreneurship, why don't you drive tech for good agenda for us? And I said, look, it should not be commercial thing, otherwise I will again hit back same thing. It has to be pure social, where we will not take any equity and we will not kind of go into any financial transaction. Then I am ready to work. So it's been 3 years. My portfolio, when I started with a foundation, it was a very standard NGO's work. They work with skilling, literacy, women entrepreneurship. And then I started saying, this all has to change. There has to be an element of tech innovation and something different, something which can be given very hard hitting to CSR. It can be a very groundbreaking for startups. And then we started calling social startups. And then we created almost 60 student startups in last 3 years. 3 to 4 of them are still running company. 4 of them, I think, got a Shark Tank funding, even though they are a social startup. Um, some of them are adopted by corporate, and the impact which we started seeing, it's a humongous impact. And with that, then I started making sense to myself. And I said, okay, this is the place, and that's how it was.
Thank you. That was great to hear your journey. Suja, I'd love to hear.
I mean, this particular role that I took on is, I think it's just came about very naturally, and I'm glad that the organization felt this is something that is important. I don't know whether it's because I'm a Keralite and you put a Keralite anywhere, that social pact is always going to be part of our DNA, whether you live in North America, whether you live anywhere across the world. But I've always been fascinated by, whatever we do, we should do something that's also for the benefit of the ecosystem that we live in. I mean, you've always been part of, even in schools and colleges, to talk about that journey, being part of a Wildlife Fund. And I've been, in my journey, in my career, actually, I started in North America. And I've always been fortunate to work with organizations which also put an importance, at that point sustainability was, this is 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. The word sustainability was still, not quite, trending. But, I was privileged to work in organizations that did put emphasis on the social aspects as well. So they encourage volunteering, for instance. Habitat for Humanity. I think I've been involved in Canada, building houses. Because as you go through the leadership channel and people they pick up, or who get a fortune to be trained like that, they look at all-rounders, right? So it is not just about, yes, we are in, I've been in consulting or wherever you are, you still are. There is obviously a business that needs to run. But you're also looking at, am I doing it in the right way, where I'm also encouraging others to follow and become role models. So I was fortunate to work in organizations like that, right? And now it has just been something, that has been a natural progression. Like I said, this organization that I've been a part of for a year and a half now, we have always invested in sustainability or social causes, I would say, right? And something that I am particularly, and I've always been, I think, an ardent supporter of, is gender equality and women empowerment. And there are so many opportunities to help when you are, when you have, a role like mine, to influence and impact, right? So even within, and I'm looking inward again, because, we start off inside and then we can go out to the society. We are I get to do something that I like technology, a blend of technology as well as, sustainability or social. a bit. So if you look inside, like in a sector like ours, like technology sector, women are generally like you come in, you see that, you know, as graduates, you have a lot more, the higher percent, or 50% or even more, 60% of them. But through their journey, somewhere around the way, like when they hit their mid-30s, you start to see them. So once they get to the leadership level, you barely see any women, right? And that has been a pressing problem. So we have, and not just with my current organization, but previously at Nissan also, we have done, purposely to bring together a community of women where we can mentor and help them through the journey, through their, to realizing their career aspirations or even their personal and development. So there is something that we call it Zafin Leading Ladies, which is something like a framework which we have borrowed from Women Empowerment Principle, which is also part of the UNGC, where we actively try to mentor and groom women as they go through it. And women at the end of the day is still the primary caregiver. You can be the CEO, you can be the, the analyst, you still have bulk of the, at least in India and, and even I think most of the South Asian places, I think, I would still say that it is not equal, right? So we are trying to do that. But, I also see that these things are very important, and as leaders, we need to set and become an example. Because if you look at today's generation, you're talking about millennials or even Generation Z, yeah, they come with a completely different attitude. So when we are trying to say, for instance, hire top talent and, get the right talent to our organization, one of the things they do look at it is the organization where I get to do my journey with some sense of purpose. Yeah. So if that is missing, what is in it for me? Right? So these are things that they look, and I'm glad they are asking those questions, right? Like, because it forces us to think as well and have a strategy and talk about it much more. So I think the world is changing. I've been fortunate to be, live in multiple countries around the world, get an experience in, across sectors. But all of that ultimately, as go into, what we are trying to do and achieve as a responsible citizen or as part of a responsible organization. Yeah.
It's great that y'all have programs like this that kind of get almost, and I think you're absolutely right. The global South and the way we look at gender roles are just so vastly different that you have to you really have to put our time into it. It's probably the first generation of women.
Absolutely, and we find that also a lot of women students, if you look at women in particular, girls, they don't have role models to aspire to.
Sure.
So that means that slowly, when it comes to, taking a technology course or a STEM course, they are not persuaded because they can't see, right? They see a few. So one of the things that we are again doing as part of it is we have a global scholarship program that we have launched, right? To really bring on and help young girls globally, and no surprises, India is always the highest number of people who has come in, but you see great talent, right? And then there is a lot of these philanthropic initiatives. We work with something called Shibulal Foundation, Family Foundation, Philanthropic Foundation. They do such an incredible job. Something called Vidyadan, where they work with underprivileged societies, kids from underprivileged societies, and as part of our CSR, we support them in their higher education. And it has been proven through research, IMK actually did some research that most of the kids who pass through these journeys successfully through their higher education or get their degree, they are able to take their families out of poverty in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Now that is an incredible impact that we are, and there is a lot of companies like us who are supporting that journey. And I think as we talk about it, these are things that we should continue to do.
Sounds good. I know we have only a couple minutes before we throw some Q&A open, but Anoop, just your journey moving into a fairly complex, difficult sector that I think, infra and housing is. Can you tell us a little about what your journey has been?
Yeah, I'm a accidental housing person, so I didn't plan to be here. I just happened to be here. So my background is in IT. I mean, I started my career. I mean, I graduated in electrical engineering from Trivandrum, and that was the time of the IT boom. I saw an opportunity, shifted to IT, and the first 18 years was in IT. I worked in India, I worked in the US, so a number of things. And I was also fortunate enough to work with Infosys. I was part of the software engineering and technology labs. I think that's where all my thinking changed a little bit. Innovation, looking at things from a different perspective, not just delivery and consulting, but more, how do you conceptualize products. So I think, that was the first part of my career, and somewhere along the way I did an MBA, and my thinking changed a little bit, and I wanted to tune my life a little bit, wanted to align my personal and professional goals, wanted a little bit more flexibility. And I was looking at multiple models, how can I do it? I mean, how can I do what I want to do and also be successful in my career? So one option was, look, you make a lot of money and then you give back to the world. And my modeling said, that is not going to happen, right? I wouldn't make that kind of money. so that was out. Second was, look, you continue to work in IT, but volunteer on the side. I mean, and that was, again, not a very viable option because weekends would be taken away, and I'm going to create a mess for myself. So I said, look, that option is out. So then I said, look, let me build a career in the impact space, and that is how I started my transition. I mean, about 10, 12 years back. It has not been easy. Again, I started applying technology to solve social issues. That's where I started. A number of things, and then environmental issues, education, skilling. I think, those are some of the things that I've looked at, and primarily I've looked at, and luckily that transition to the social sector was also my exposure to the world of startups. I didn't plan it that way, I mean, the timing was sort of right, and I started working with a lot of social enterprises, and I liked it. I mean, I like working with startups. And yeah, I think, so that's my journey into the world of impact. But sustainability, again, is very special to me. I'm a bit of a clean freak, right? And my wife tells me, if you clean, it is really clean. So why don't you clean it, right? And that's a nice thing because I like doing it, and I'm sort of an organizer, a restorer. So I think, so when I look at all of the work, I mean, that is happening right now in the context of housing and sustainability and the built environment, it is more about reorganizing or optimizing resources, and how do you recycle, reuse, and all of that stuff. So I think so I mean, personally I like doing it, but housing, I mean, I didn't plan to be here. So
Thank you very much, all three of you. Have really enjoyed this conversation, and see you next year on the main stage. Thanks. Bye bye.